Welcome to NVL Travel Documentary.
The reality in California is no longer glamorous photos or bright Hollywood lights. Walk just a few blocks and you'll see a widespread crisis: homeless people huddled in tents, living among garbage, poverty, and desperation, struggling amid deprivation, garbage, and the pressures of survival. The homeless population in America's wealthiest state is skyrocketing, and the numbers are staggering. It's not just a few hundred or a few thousand. It's hundreds of thousands of people living on the margins of society, right in the heart of a modern city. This isn't just a humanitarian crisis. It's a warning about a broken system. Number 1. Capital of Instantanity. California is not the most densely populated state in the U.S., but it has the highest homeless population, accounting for about 30% of the country. In 2024, the number of homeless people living there was more than 181,000. Of those, about 70% lived outdoors, meaning they slept on sidewalks, in parks, under bridges, or in old cars without formal shelter. This gap makes California the state with the highest proportion of homeless people sleeping outdoors in the country. The situation did not explode overnight, but rather accumulated over many years, growing faster than the state's ability to respond. From 2015 to 2023, the total number of homeless people in this state increased by nearly 50%. Despite the state spending billions of dollars each year to address the problem, the number of people falling into homelessness has increased steadily without interruption. Behind the numbers is a reality: the cost of living has become unsustainable for low and middle-income earners. The minimum wage in California in 2025 is $16 an hour, or about $2,560 a month for a full-time job. Meanwhile, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles or San Francisco exceeds $2,500 a month. The income-rent gap is no longer a temporary barrier, but a dead end for hundreds of thousands of people. It is unimaginable that when legal income cannot guarantee a basic roof over one's head, what keeps workers in the city. It's not just rising rents. California has unique factors that make the situation worse. A year-round temperate climate that makes it easier for homeless people to survive outdoors. Temporary pandemic eviction moratoriums that have expired, and a lack of public housing. Limited land complex construction processes and protests from residents have also stalled the expansion of affordable housing. Remarkably, nearly 90% of California's homeless are not from elsewhere. They have had shelter in the county where they are sleeping rough. This refutes the notion that homeless people are spilling from other states because of policies that help them. The problem is not from outside. It is local. Emergency housing solutions have not kept pace. The number of shelter beds available statewide can accommodate only about 40% of the homeless. The rest are left to fend for themselves each night. That explains why tent encampments are expanding not just in city centers, but also on the outskirts along highways and in parking lots. This picture is not static. It is moving every day. And at the center of that movement are numbers that cannot be ignored. Number 2. California's urban system is out of balance. California's homelessness crisis is not just a reflection of a breakdown in housing policy. It is also the result of a chain of social, economic, and legal conditions that are accelerating the displacement of more and more people from stable housing onto the streets. Between 2020 and 2023, the number of households unable to afford rent in major metropolitan areas increased by more than 30%. The disparity between rent and income is no longer a problem limited to a single vulnerable group, but is also affecting people who once had stable jobs. California's current unemployment rate hovers around 5.3%. That's not a high number by national standards, but rents are rising every quarter making it difficult for even employed people to maintain an independent lifestyle. A full-time worker earning the median wage still spends more than 60% of his or her income on rent, a rate considered unsustainable by international financial standards. Many people who once had full-time jobs and legal leases still end up living in tents or old cars. The collapse doesn't start with unemployment or law violations, but with costs rising faster than they can handle. In Los Angeles, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment has surpassed $2,600 a month, while the statewide minimum wage only brings in about $2,560 for someone working 40 hours a week. With such a gap, even those who work regularly can no longer afford to live independently in an urban environment. A slew of pandemic relief programs have ended without a corresponding successor. Meanwhile, electric bills have increased nearly 15%. In 2 years, individual medical expenses have increased an average of 8% annually, and gas prices have topped $5 a gallon in many areas. A single renter doesn't need to lose their job, just have all their essential expenses increase slightly to be at risk of eviction in less than 2 months. What happens when people who still obey the law, pay their taxes and work, are no longer kept in a stable orbit by the system? California's tenant protections are inconsistently enforced across jurisdictions. Many jurisdictions have eliminated eviction moratoriums or do not provide free legal assistance, while landlords have broad powers to raise rents, terminate short-term leases, or evict properties with as little as 30 days' notice. Tenants are effectively passive recipients of a system where market forces trump welfare. The problem doesn't erupt overnight. It builds up from small, constant stresses that build up month after month. As rent, food, health insurance, transportation, and living expenses all rise, the line between living enough and being homeless becomes razor thin. And with thousands of people falling through that line every month, what's being tested isn't individual resilience, but the ability of the system to maintain stability. Number 3, resolution, not resolution. California has enacted more than 200 policies and programs related to homelessness over the past 10 years. By 2025, the state's total spending on these solutions will exceed $24 billion. Yet despite increases in spending each term, the situation shows no signs of abating. In fact, the number of people without stable housing continues to rise, especially in major cities like Los Angeles, San Jose, and Sacramento. One of the biggest recent developments has been the move to allow local governments to take the initiative in dealing with tent encampments. Under the new legal framework, cities are now empowered to limit or ban overnight public sleeping in places where there are alternatives. Local governments have since launched a series of cleanup campaigns clearing and relocating homeless people from central areas. Every time the order to clear the camps is issued, public reaction is clearly divided. One side argues that the tents are unsafe, unsanitary, and damage the city's image. The other side worries that clearing the tents without a long-term solution will push the problem aside, not solve it. So when emergency intervention is used continuously as a permanent form of operation, is it considered a technical measure or a political response? Many cities have experimented with temporary housing models, such as tiny homes, converted hotel rooms, and congregate shelters. However, actual occupancy rates in some places are as low as 30 to 40% of capacity. The reasons include inadequate living conditions, short stays, and strict regulations. When temporary housing is no more attractive than living on the street, the system loses its original appeal. Effective policy requires 2 things: capacity to implement and sustainability. When both are lacking, implementation is more likely to be a formality than a solution. And the richer a city is, the more pronounced the mismatch between resources and reality becomes. Number 4. City of dimming light. In a state that attracts more than 270 million visitors a year, urban image is key. California is not just a vacation destination, it is America's international front. But what visitors see in major city centers in recent years is no longer what the brochures say. Once stellar areas like downtown San Francisco, Hollywood Boulevard, and Venice Beach are being overrun by tents, turning popular landmarks into low-rated areas for cleanliness, safety, and visual enjoyment. Domestic and international tourism have recorded a significant decline in repeat visitors in post-pandemic surveys. Cities are still seeing large numbers of new visitors, but return rates are lower, along with negative feedback related to streetscapes disorder and feelings of insecurity at night. The impact is not limited to tourism. The local economic ecosystem, from retail to food and beverage to events, is being affected in a widespread way. In some central districts, store revenue is down 15% to 25% compared to pre-2019 levels, while maintenance, security, and urban cleaning costs have increased significantly. At many major intersections and central parks in California, the prolonged presence of makeshift encampments has dramatically changed the way people use public space. Some commercial streets no longer support the same traffic volumes as before, while the need for access to outdoor spaces has increased dramatically since the pandemic. Shared spaces have shrunk, and social boundaries between groups of residents have become more pronounced. In that context, the images reflecting the reality are no longer limited to the internal framework. According to statistics from the state tourism industry, the number of international visitors returning to major cities in California after 2022 is down more than 20% compared to the pre-COVID period, even though other destinations in the U.S. have nearly fully recovered. Assessments of hygiene, order, and urban environment are noted as the factors that have the biggest impact on the experience. What many people are starting to wonder is that as public spaces become less accessible, will cities still be able to connect, or will they gradually become more divided? Some localities have tried to apply the model of transitional space-designated areas for controlled housing of homeless people. However, implementation capacity is limited by budgets and resistance from surrounding residents. Most pilot sites have been overwhelmed or stopped midway due to lack of consensus. The tensions are not limited to urban management frameworks. As pedestrian expectations collide with realities on the streets, the challenge is no longer to maintain image, but to maintain the reliability of the entire operating system. And in a place once considered a model of modern planning, the gap between expectations and reality is widening. Number 5. The mystery in the dark outside, the purview of policy small communities exist that are spontaneous, unregulated, and without formal support mechanisms. These areas often develop on the urban fringes, abandoned parking lots, disused railway tracks, abandoned industrial areas, or along the edges of rivers and ports. There, homeless people attempt to reorganize a semi-permanent form of life with permanent tents, self-determined living arrangements, and internal rules based on agreement. Many of California's pop-up encampments were formed not as a protest, but as a means of survival. With no access to formal housing, homeless people turned to semi-permanent settlements, pitching semi-permanent tents, living in old cars, sharing power from batteries or solar panels, and even dividing their living spaces to reduce conflict. Some maintained internal order for years before being dismantled due to pressure from the government or backlash from the surrounding community. During the survey in some big cities like Oakland, San Jose, or Riverside, there were spontaneous areas that remained stable from 18 to 36 months without serious conflicts. However, when they were cleared, the entire community disappeared from all maps and monitoring systems, making the assessment of the actual situation incomplete. In the midst of that reality, many people wonder if marginalized communities can build their own sustainable living models that are much more sustainable than many official projects. What is keeping the system from meeting their basic needs? As the exception becomes the norm, the notions of center and periphery begin to invert. And at that point, what needs to be tested is no longer the extent of intervention, but the accuracy of the map on which policy is based. Number 6. California and the problem of homelessness. Since 2018, California's total spending on programs to address homelessness has exceeded $24 billion, with more than $12 billion going directly to emergency housing, temporary housing health services, and administrative management. Yet nearly half of the state's counties have failed to meet their original homelessness reduction targets, with some even seeing double-digit increases in homeless populations despite the steady influx of money. Some of the money has gone to building tiny homes called flexible temporary solutions that cost more than $300,000 per unit in some areas. The high cost of temporary solutions has been controversial, as many areas still lack basic infrastructure, reliable heating, and use portable toilets placed off-site. The large investment but inefficiency has left many areas empty or operating below capacity. It is widely recognized that homeless people are less likely to take up the services they are offered. In many projects that convert old hotels into housing, the utilization rate is below 40%. Restricted living conditions, strict internal rules, lack of privacy, and a sense of loss of control are the main reasons why homeless people choose to return to tents or vehicles. Is the system providing what the beneficiaries really need, or just what their budget can afford? In addition, there are still many loopholes in the monitoring and allocation of resources. Some places report spending up to 90% of their budgets on administrative and operational costs, while the rate of homeless people being supported to transition to long-term housing is less than 10%. This situation not only makes the money less effective, but also erodes confidence in the capacity of local policy management. While political pressure forced local governments to come up with quick solutions, the system operated with high delays, high costs, and poor coordination. This made each step of the implementation a costly gamble, with results often falling short of initial expectations. Number 7. The richer, the more the loser in the housing war. California's homeless rate is now nearly 3 times higher than the national average. While many other states have managed to control the rate of homelessness, California continues to be home to nearly half of the nation's unhoused population. This is especially true when juxtaposed with major cities like New York, where the homeless population is also high, but the majority are housed in shelters. Internationally, California's model of response shows a large gap in effectiveness compared to some countries with similar incomes. Large cities such as Berlin, Helsinki, and Tokyo all maintain homelessness rates below 0.1% of their population. What these systems have in common is not large budgets, but rather early prevention programs, continuously functioning social housing systems, and rental policies that do not fluctuate with the market. From a comparative perspective, what is striking is not just the numbers, but the speed of the response. Many international models deal with crises from the moment they arise, while the California system operates as a last resort system. When tens of thousands of people have been displaced, restoring living conditions is not only technically difficult, but also socially costly. At a time when the global trend is shifting to sustainable governance, a system that is too slow to act on prevention will be forced to spend many times more on remediation. And in that picture, speed is sometimes as important as resources. Number 8. Slim hope. Amid pressure on the system from multiple fronts, some localities are starting to shift to a data-driven approach. Rather than waiting for people to fall into crisis before intervening, a preventative model is being implemented by analyzing information about income rental history, access to healthcare, and social interactions to identify risks early. This allows authorities to intervene as soon as warning signs appear, rather than reacting when the problem has spiraled out of control. Notably, when there is coordination between management agencies, independent organizations, and community groups, the improvement is significantly increased. The proportion of people who maintain housing after 12 months of intervention exceeded 85% in some pilot projects. Although the scale is still small compared to the total number of people needing support, these results show that the way forward is not necessarily to start at large scale, but to start with standardization, efficiency, and consensus. At a time when many support programs are being cut due to budget pressures, the accuracy and timeliness of data becomes key to prioritizing resources. A well-placed dollar can make a difference many times over than spread out investments without effective tracking mechanisms. The shift in approach also comes from the recognition that homelessness is not just a consequence of poverty. It is the result of a chain of deficits housing healthcare, legal protections, an education system, and an economic environment that supports the working class. To address the root causes, policy cannot focus on housing alone, but must intervene across the entire chain. And is the solution really lacking, or just lacking the conditions for the solution to last? For many, a small room and a temporary address are enough to get back on track. But for that to happen en masse, the system needs more than kindness. It needs thoughtful design and clear political will. And it is at the intersection of action and commitment that small but consistent changes can build into the foundation of a real solution. Thank you for following along to the end of the journey with NVL Travel Documentary. The story of California's homelessness crisis is not just about numbers, but a sign that any city can face cracks from within if it doesn't look directly at the root of the problem. If you find this topic worth pondering, don't forget to share the video with those interested, and subscribe to the NVL Travel Documentary channel so you don't miss out on insightful perspectives on society, cities, and people around the world. You can also leave a comment to share your perspective. We always read and appreciate every opinion.